event where we have, with all of the members, we have used an artifact from upstairs to introduce our beginning of shooting today. So the museum is funded by the Washington County and St. George RAP tax, and so it's free to the public to come here. And we also have funding from the Utah Arts and Museums. We like to have everybody come back sometime and go upstairs and see all of our artifacts and photos that we have cherished and preserved as history for the Washington County. So today I have Mr. Robert Singleton here. He's been shooting since he was about 14 years old, or maybe a little older.
No, high school.
High school. And he came here from Southern California, maybe the 14 years ago. Mm-hmm. So he's been collecting for many years also. And his alias is 1 Ton, and his wife is here, and her alias is Naughty Nancy. Take it from there. So please welcome Mr. Robert Singleton.
Thank you. As you can tell, my alias is a little bit play on my last name, Singleton, 1 Ton. Nancy's alias is her great aunt in the Klondike goldfields in Alaska. She was a madam of the second largest brothel in Skagway. So that's how she come up with that one. So we all come up with our own, such along this line, either past history people, somebody in history, somebody in your family. My daughter back there, Becky, when she decides she wants to go shoot one of my great aunts, his name is Pearl Lily Green, and she wants to be Pearl Lily. So anyway, what we're going to talk about today is basically the evolution of revolvers. And I don't have a copy of everything that's out there, mainly because I have somebody sitting over here on the bench that says no. So once in a while I can sneak one in. But anyway, I've got a good representation of what was out there. The first picture I have up here is considered to be the first functional revolver. It's made by Colt, and it's called the Colt Patterson. If you notice on that particular gun, there's no trigger guard, there's no trigger, and there's no loading hand. There's no loading lever to switch the bullets in there. I don't know if you can see it in the back or not, but that's the way they made it. The trigger did not appear until the hammer was pulled all the way back. It would stick out. If you fired your 5 shots and you had to reload, you had to disassemble the gun. You pushed the pin out, pulled the barrel off, left the cylinder in place. You had this device that fit over the stem that the cylinder was sitting on, and you could print it in that way, and then you had to put it all back together. So later on, they came up with something that was a little bit quicker. But I'm going with Colt. I'm going to deal with Colt, Remington, and Smith & Wesson because those are the 3 biggest ones that were out in the West. And there are a myriad of other smaller manufacturers that appeared, disappeared, and were absorbed by one of those 3. So anyway, the Schofield, the Patterson was called Patterson because it was Patterson, New Jersey when they first started making it. They eventually moved to Hartford, Connecticut, where they were at till I think they were still there today. The Colt Patterson was a blessing and a curse for Colt. Got their name in the limelight of multi-fired pistols. It also made them go bankrupt because when they sold these things to start with, they made a guarantee. If it breaks, send it back, we'll fix it. Well, metallurgy of this came out in 1836. Anybody know what was going on in Texas in 1836? The Alamo. And what were they using there? Flintlock pistols and rifles. This was something they really knew. So they finally got into production in about 1830. 1839, 1840, where they finally got into full production. There was over 2,000, and there were over 2,000 of them manufactured. The first 200 went to the Republic of Texas Navy. And the Texas Rangers really liked the looks of it, so they bought another 100. So the first 300 went to the state of Texas, or I say Republic of Texas, because this wasn't a state yet. And there was a couple of drawbacks to it. One, it was 36 caliber, and it was a very low velocity bullet. It only went out about 600 feet per second. 25 yards was about maximum effective range on this pistol, but you still had 5 shots that you didn't have before. So, and at the same time that this was coming out, the Texas Rangers were dealing with a little problem with the Comanche Indians, so that was really usable for them, and the Comanches learned really quick that, okay, I may not get killed by this pistol they're shooting at me, but they're shooting 5 times at me, I'm going to go somewhere else, which is how it worked. A Texas Ranger captain by the name of Walker told Colt, this is after they'd gone out of business, told Colt, say, why don't you design a new pistol, and I want it substantially larger and more effective and powerful than the one you just made. And like most people, then when they redesign something to something else, they go overboard. And those of you who know what a Colt Walker is, this is a Colt Walker pistol. It's about 5 pounds, empty. Yeah, 9.5-inch long barrel, 44 caliber, and that's why I have a stand here for it to try and so you could get a little bit of an idea of how big this thing is. It's heavy. You could not wear it in a holster, because when it's fully loaded, it's almost 6 pounds, and you're going to be walking like this a lot. They had holster develops that would fit over the top of a saddle on the front. So you'd have 2 on each side, 1 on each side. And that's the way they were sold. The original Walkers there was only 1,000 made for the Republic of Texas under contract. Colt negotiated with the Republic of Texas. We would like to build another 100 for the civilian market, so they could get some money back and get themselves started. When this was going into production in 1847, they had no way of producing it. They were out of business. So they went to this guy by the name of Eli Whitney and said, would you make pistols for us? So the first 1,000 were made by Eli Whitney. If you're looking around and somebody says, I have an authentic, original Colt Walker, if you look on the barrel, it will not say Colt. It'll say Eli Whitney across the barrel. And the last one that I saw that went for auction, you'd have to sell your house, your car, and mortgage your kids to get it. It was a little over $2 million for one pistol. So that's not it. That's made in Italy. So, but that was their first step. And it worked out very well. It was substantially more powerful. In fact, at one point in time, and it was a long time, the Colt Walker was the most powerful handgun ever made, until Smith & Wesson came up with this thing called a .357 Magnum. So it was 1910, 1915 before that was overthrown as the big one. You could put 60 grains of black powder in here for a powder charge. To give you an idea, my Hawken 50 caliber rifle, I use 60 grains of black powder in that. And I shoot at something at 300 yards. You can imagine what this is going to be like at 60 grains in a handgun. You're definitely not going to shoot like Clint Eastwood did in Outlaw Josie Wales. You will not be riding your horse pulling this off with one hand. There's no way, unless you're Schwarzenegger or something. They are extremely heavy. So that was the one thing that was kind of the drawback. The other thing is that they were originally given a mold for a conical bullet, similar to our bullets that we put in our pistols now. Nice little shaped bullet. Trouble is, you couldn't fit it in there straight when they ram it in, and it would come out, it would swedge out and be slightly crooked as it was going down through the barrel, and you'd get this kind of gear effect of the bullet going out, so accuracy wasn't too good. So they decided, hey, there's a 44 caliber round ball that works real well. So they put that in there and switched that in there, made it tighter. Pressures went up, and that's when you started having the top part of the cylinder blowing apart, and because of overpressurization. And that was the drawback to this pistol. When they started, when just about the time when the Mexican War was starting, they came up with an idea, hey, let's downsize this thing a little bit. And instead of a 9-inch barrel, let's make it a 7-inch barrel. Instead of being able to hold 60 grains of black powder, let's hold 50 grains of black powder, which won't blow the gun apart. And also metallurgy was a little bit better. And I have a picture, because I don't own them, of the Colt Dragoon. There are models 1, 2, and 3. And I just showed 1 and 3 because that's the first one and the last one they had in this thing. The differences are really slight as between each one. Outside of the fact is the barrel and everything. Basically, they downsized this thing by a third. So instead of it being 5 pounds, it's only a little under 4 pounds. It's still considered a horse pistol, so you had holsters on your horses. And that went into production all the way up through until the start of the Civil War, 1860. So, and there were several thousand of those. The Dragoon from 1851 to 1860. About 7,000 of them were made between 1848 and 1850. And so they made a lot of them. And since war is usually the necessary of invention, they needed them for the war effort, and that's how they end up going with it. If you look at this one here, this is pretty tight spacing. That's loose. There's a little crook on the hammer on this one. That one has a cutoff on the trigger guard. This one is round on the trigger guard. So that's how they developed it going through up until the Civil War. And they were quite handy. They were not much in the way of problems with them. They worked really well. The Texas Rangers loved them because of what they were doing with them. And when the Civil War came out, they were looking for something that Colt could design to make it easier, because at that time, every officer was carrying a sidearm, and all the Union cavalry troopers all carried a sidearm as well as a single-shot rifle. Well, when the Civil War came around, they came up with something a little bit lighter and a little bit nicer. This is called the 1860 Army, which is what just about everybody knows as the cap and ball. It's 44 caliber, and it was accepted by the Army and made in the hundreds of thousands during that time, mainly for the war effort. The only drawback was a lot of them didn't like the idea there was no top strap across here, so these are called open tops. Yes? What? Talk a little louder? Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Yes, it's called an open top. And they thought it was a weak design, which it probably was. During the Civil War, officers, mostly cavalry units, didn't. They carried several cylinders that were already pre-charged and ready to go. The only thing about it was you had to pull this pin out, pull the barrel off, pull the cylinder out, put the new cylinder on, put the barrel back on, and put the pin back in. So it got a little time-consuming doing it that way. And then it's almost as fast as if you were just going ahead and just take that down and just load it one at a time. So at that time, Remington, who had been making rifles and other things, decided, let's get into the pistol market too. Well, they made a pistol that's considered to be a full-frame pistol. They're basically the same thing as the Colt. They were both 44 caliber. They both had 6 shots, and they're both cap and ball. But it was easier to deal with this one if you're going to change cylinders out of it, because you had a little pin right here you just pulled up, and the cylinder would fall out. Put it back in, put it back down, and it would be ready to shoot again. But they tend to wanted the Rugers more because the soldiers did, because they thought it was a lot more sturdy and was not prone to people remembering the Walker and its cylinders blowing apart. But there was a few thousand of these being made at the same time. About 120,000 were made during the Civil War. In fact, at one point they were making 1,000 a week. And it wasn't just Remington, and it wasn't just Colt. There was a myriad of different companies out there making pistols during this time. Spiller and Burr, Star, some of the other ones that kind of disappeared after the war was over. In fact, when the war ended, when it got down to about 1880, into the 1880s, the Army still had a myriad of these pistols still in storage. So in order to get rid of them, they sold them in lots, and they sold them by the pound. So you could go in there, buy a lot, and say, like, okay, I got a lot of these, lot. You got a number of these pistols, and if you go to a unit price, this cost me $0.25. So I change it out, put a cylinder in there that can fire a cartridge round, and put it back on the market and sell it for $4. I just made $3.75. So they did that a lot of it. Remington tried to stay with Colt, but Remington really was more of a long gun manufacturer than a pistol manufacturer. When it got down to after the Civil War, they couldn't compete with Colt because they had an in with the Army, and most people didn't want to spend something like that. And till the conversion kits came out for their going from a cap and ball type to a pistol caliber cartridge type pistol. The trouble they had was in that time, the through bore cylinder, that's where you drill all the way through it, and there's no backing to it. When Smith & Wesson owned the patent to that, and they couldn't make them. So what they did is they did a workaround. They have the same type of cylinder. They cut the back of it off, so now you've got a through-bore cylinder, which is illegal, but you have a back that goes back onto the back of it that allows it to either fire a rimfire cartridge, which is what everything was up until about 1868 when centerfires came out, to a centerfire cartridge later on. So that kind of worked around. That was kind of a workaround. And when 1870 rolled around, the patent went off as far as what Smith & Wesson had, this patent on this particular type. And Smith & Wesson at the time was not making anything big as far as a pistol. They were making what we would refer to now as a 22 rimfire little pocket thing. That's all they had. That's what they were coming up with. And when Colt designed their, what is known to everybody around in our group, is known as the Peacemaker or the Colt Single Action Army. They came out in 1873. At the same time, centerfire cartridges were coming out. At the same time, they were able to develop a brass to where you can hollow out the back of it and put a primer in there with a hole in it, and it would be a lot better than a rimfire, because you cannot reload a rimfire. You can reload a centerfire cartridge. So they came up with, and Colt's the one that did it, came out first, which is usually what they were. They came out with the standard, and as you notice, I always make sure it's empty. Standard Colt 40, this is a standard Colt 1873 single action. Civilian market called a Peacemaker. The Army market called it an Army Colt. And they came in different calibers, different barrel lengths, and was a gun. Well, let me look at my notes here. Okay, Colt single action was in continuous production from 1873 to 1940. It stopped during the war, and then in 1956 they started back up, and it's still being made today. So you talk about a popular weapon, there's no doubt how many millions of these guns are out there. The ones I have are copies, and they're made in Italy. So, and Remington tried to make one that looked like this. It didn't work out well for him because nobody wanted to buy it, basically. In 1875, an Army officer by the name of Schofield said, "Hey, I got a better idea for you guys that are in the cavalry. When you're in the cavalry and you shoot your 6 shots, you're going to have to stop your horse, open the loading gate, and knock out each one of these things one at a time." Well, that's kind of dumb. Smith & Wesson came up with this idea called the Colt Schofield, or the Smith & Wesson Schofield, and it's considered what they refer to as a top break. You pull the hammer back half cock, you grab a hold of the sight that's in the back, and the whole front bops open. And the shells are ejected out. New shells are put in, you close it back up, and you go. But you can do all that holding it in the same hand that you have the reins of your horse in. So you're still moving at a pretty good clip when you're reloading. And this was not bad. It was the only thing about it is a lot of these manufacturers, for some reason, are determined to sell you the gun, but also sell you the bullets to go with it. Instead of being 45 Long Colt, this was 45 Schofield. And no, they are not interchangeable. A 45 Schofield will fire in a single action Army. A 45 Long Colt will not fit in that chamber. It's too long. So, but the thing about it was easier for the soldier on horseback, half cocked, open it up, hit it on the side of his pants, it would pop open, the shells would fall out, he'd transfer it to his reins hand and load it back up, close it, and he'd be done. Done. I have a gun here that I'm going to show you a little bit later on, but this is also a Smith & Wesson top break. It's during that time also that these were coming out. It was also called a pocket pistol because a lot of cities, including Deadwood, Yuma, and even Tombstone, you could not carry a gun openly. And the reason being is they didn't want any, but everybody carried one in a pocket, so this fit. So this one here has no hammer. It's internal. So you push the button, open it up. Then you see this little thing right here on top. That raises the shells out. And once they're popped out, push it down, it retracts, and you reload it, and you're ready to go again. It's double action, so you just keep pulling it until it stops going bang. This is 38. Smith & Wesson. A lot of them were made to be 32s, 31s, and such along this line. To kind of go along with the Colt single actions, you had a myriad of different designs to deal with. This one is the same thing, has a shorter barrel, and it's all engraved. So you can get fancy. Or you can get what is known as semi-fancy and punch it up with a staghorn grip of some kind. And that could be your other one. And this is a 5.5 inch long barrel, just like the other one. And the barrel length on this particular firearm ran the gamut from 3 inches all the way out to Buntline, who was the guy that invented the dime novel. Had Colt make 2 of them, one for White Earp and one for Bat Bastardson. And they all had 12-inch long barrels. Wyatt used to carry his around when he was... White Earp was never a sheriff. He was never a marshal. He was a deputy sheriff or a deputy marshal. He was always second banana. And he would get into fights, and he would pull the gun out, not to shoot him, but to bat him on the head with it. That was his way of getting out of it. But he did have it at one of the few gunfights that is actually documented, and that's the shootout at the OK Corral, which did not happen at the OK Corral. It happened in an alley down the street from the OK Corral, and it was in between 2 buildings that were, one was a photography shop, and the other one was a boarding house that Doc Holliday and Big Nose Kate were staying at the time. And to give you an idea of perspective, well, depth is no problem, width is the problem. That particular shootout took place in an alley that was 15 feet wide, about the size of this room. And in that alleyway, there were 9 men and 2 horses in it. And everybody had pistols except Doc. He was given a shotgun by Virgil Earp, and Virgil got his cane. And Doc didn't shoot at anybody. He fired it in the air because a guy was hiding behind one of the horses, and he wanted to make the horse jump. So the horse ran out of the way, and then Doc pulled out his pistols and shot them. And the whole gunfight only took about 30 seconds. And in that 30 seconds, 30 rounds were expended. 2 men dead, or 3 men were killed, and those were all the Clanton gang. Virgil Earp ended up with a bullet wound in the leg, and Morgan had a bullet wound in the left shoulder. Doc had a grazed bullet wound on his hip, and like always, Wyatt Earp, being the guy that he was, wearing a full-length frock coat, didn't get one shot in him, but that frock coat was full of holes. How that missed him, nobody knows. But he had myriad of bullet holes in that frock coat, and not one of them struck pay dirt. So Wyatt lived a very primed life, I want to say. But also the Schofield, I'll go back to the Schofield here. They did a marketing thing that was a little bit different. They decided to go international. And they had an international gun show in England in about 1877. And they brought their pistols over. And the Tsarina of Russia, Catherine the Great, thought that this pistol was really neat and their cavalry could really use one. So they had him come over, they did a demonstration, and they were convinced that they were going to get this. So Smith & Wesson made a specific gun for the Russian army. It's called the It's called the Schofield Model 3 Russian. The only difference is right here on the trigger guard area, there was a little hook that hung down like this, and that was a saber grabber. So in case because they use sabers over in Europe a lot. And the Tsarina wanted to modernize their army, so they were getting guns from all over Europe, and the handgun from Smith & Wesson, and over an 8-year period, they made over 130,000 of them for the Russian army. And that's how they were able to stay in business. Remington kind of faded out of the way. Going into now, what I was talking about before, a lot of the big cities, Tombstone, Yuma, Deadwood, Dodge City. Boy, of course, when you get back further on the other side of the river, St. Louis, Philadelphia, New York, nobody was carrying guns out in the open. So that's why they came up with a pocket pistol like this, and also a pocket pistol like this one. This is a cap and ball. This is 31 caliber. This is 38 caliber. This one is a Civil War relic. This is the only antique pistol that I own. This is 1873 or 63 when this was made. And if you get a chance and look at it, you look down the barrel there. The barrel's not round; it's octagon, where the bullets came out. That's how they had to cut it. Now, this particular one happened because of Smith & Wesson reading a story in a newspaper to where a man was pulling a gun out like that had a hammer on it out of his pocket. The hammer got caught. He pulled on it. The hammer was back far enough. It went off, killed a child. So he went to his engineers and said, "We're going to build something that has no hammer on it." And the engineer says, "You cannot make this." Well, they did. This is it. This is called the 38 safety pistol, because there's no hammer, and this right back here is just like the tab on a 1911. That has to be depressed in order for the gun to work. So you have to have your hand completely around it, squeezing that to pull the trigger. And it's only double action. There's no single action. And like I said before, it just opens up, and it's 5 shots of 38 Smith & Wesson. I shoot this in cowboy when we do. We have side events, and one of them is pocket pistol, and this is what I use. The next step is I stopping in 1890, because that's when the swing-out cylinders all came out, the pistols that we know today. And this one, copy that I have here, this is a Ruger, and this is my carry gun when I carry it. And like I said, there's a swing-out cylinder. There's no difference between this and the one that was made back in 1899 than this one is, except the metal in it. Still the same thing. So, anyway, that's pretty much the development of pistols. I didn't want to go any further than 1900, mainly because you're running into smokeless powder is a lot more prevalent and available, and you're getting into semi-automatic and automatic pistols now. And these are the development of it. The ones you buy now of the 73s from Uberti, Petrocelli, or even Colt are the same ones they made back in 1873. Same thing. Springs are different. Metallurgy is different because the metal is more pure. They were able finally to come about and add carbon to iron to make it steel. And then they were able to add nickel with the carbon to make it nickel steel, which is what most of the guns are made of. And that's about it.
Any questions?
Anybody's got, yes?
So, what gun shot Abraham Lincoln? Because we always hear it was a little tiny
It was a single shot Derringer, and the Derringer back in those days was bigger than that. But it's a single shot Derringer that shot Lincoln, and it was a cap and ball pistol. And
I'm going to put your pictures
oh,
up here
okay,
for people
thank
to
you.
see.
Yeah.
Well, I came to see Joseph Swiss pepper box.
No, you know what? I did not go to those because they're. That's a little bit heavy.
Yeah, it's heavy.
Yeah, just leave it on this. I don't know if you're going to be able to get them all up there. Here,
Okay.
here. I'll just leave this one on the stand.
Okay.
You can come up and look at them. But when you start getting one of the things they did try for many years was, hey, we'll have more shots if we add more barrels. Every time you add a barrel to a gun, you're doubling the weight of the gun. And there has been some that I have seen that are 4-shot shotguns, 2 side-by-side barrels, one on top of the other. You fired those two. You spun the barrel. You spun the stock around to line up the other 2 barrels and fire those. In other words, you just tripled the weight of the gun. You're not getting any more firepower out of it because it's going to take you 4 times as long to reload it. And so that's what they came up with. And some of the revolvers they came up with were you'd fire it, but then you'd have to turn the barrel yourself, and because you're still dealing with a multi-barrel pistol. Yes?
What's a cap and ball mean?
Cap and ball is this here. The ball is the round ball that goes in the cylinder along with the powder. The cap is the percussion cap that fits on this little thing on the back here called a nipple. And that's where the percussion comes from. It's like a primer of today, except it's open. Yeah, Bruce.
What were the chances of a chain fire in a cap and ball if you loaded it incorrectly?
There were chances of it, mostly because the cap was put on too tight, and when you fired it, the other caps would go off. Most of the time, they sealed the front of it with some kind of bear grease or something else to also made the cylinder turn better. But I've fired these things many, many times, and I've never had one go off. Doesn't mean it can't happen. Just like the Walker putting too much powder in it and blowing the entire top of the gun off apart. So there are problems with it. You just pay attention to what you're doing. You're not reloading. You're not like what we're reloading our 73s with our cartridge guns. You just sit there and keep putting them into this done and close it up, cock it, and put it in your pocket, and get ready to shoot it. There are more things that need to be done with it. I haven't shot the Walker, mainly because I don't want to. The thing is way too heavy and kind of unwieldy, to be honest with you. I'll be finished here in a few minutes. You can come up here and actually grab a hold of this beast. And it's the changeover between that and the Colt Patterson was the Colt Patterson was 36 caliber and 5 shots. This is 44 caliber and 6 shots. This had a muzzle velocity of 600 feet per second. That had a muzzle velocity over 1,200 feet per second. So when well, let me get this. The exact verbiage from Sam Walker. A handgun was extremely more powerful than the Patterson, and that's what he wanted. Extremely more powerful. In other words, I guess he felt like killing something when he shot at it. And production numbers are up here on my little cheat sheet. You can read that. The Schofield, I like the Schofield myself. It's not very good for cowboy shooting, especially those of us that shoot one-handed, because I have a big palm and short fingers. I have to reach up like this to get the hammer. So that's why the 73s are pretty good for me because it's a short grip. My little finger goes down here, my indicator goes here, and my hand fits up on top. So I can cock it fairly easily. And that's my myriad of knowledge of this stuff. Once you get to 1873, it's pretty much the same gun all the way up through till now. And then when you get to about 1890, when the swing cylinders came out, and Smith & Wesson was one of the first ones to come out with that, it's the same thing as my concealed carry Ruger. The metals are different, but that's about it. Okay.
Any more questions? We'd like to thank you very much for coming and bringing your
Thank you.
display today.
And if you want to, you can come up here and take a look at these, pick them up, see what they're like. This one and this one are my two antiques. This is 1873 or 63. This is about 1895. Huh? Oh, it's light, very, very light. Yeah, that shoots smokeless. Smokeless powder came out. Smokeless powder came out in about 1881. A Belgian guy by the name of DuPont came up with what they call nitrocellulose. Yeah.
May I look at these?